invited, dear listener, to come along on a strange new journey, an adventure into an exciting realm of fantasy, science fiction, movies, comic books, role-playing games, and more as the nerdy photographer dives deep into the search for what makes him so nerdy. Join us for Nerd Quests. I'm just going to do a quick intro. Hello and welcome to the Nerdy Photographer. This is one of our special Nerd Quest episodes, and I am joined by agents Scott and Cam from the Spy Hearts podcast. And today we're going to discuss one of my all-time favorites, Sean Connery. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, glad to be here.
Hello there. Thank you very much for having us. I do want to jump in. Is Zoom meant to be recording, or is it all on your deck?
It's all on my deck.
I'm sorry for interrupting the flow.
We can do that again if you want.
No, you can just cut that bit off if you'd like. Well, I'll just say my bit again. That's fine. Yeah. Hello there, and thank you for having us.
It's been a while that we've been internet friends. I've been looking forward to the chance to collaborate on something, and this is, I know that Sean Connery plays a big part of in the genre of what you guys cover on your podcast. For me, it has absolutely nothing to do with my regular parts of programming with photography, but he's always been sort of for me, a lifelong kind of obsession figure. My mom, as I've mentioned off mic, was a huge fan of Mr. Connery, and not just as James Bond, but in pretty much everything that he did. And I just find it I find his acting career and choices very interesting. I don't know how you guys feel apart from the Bond years, but I think that the post-Bond era has some very interesting moments to it.
We could plot out his entire filmography and throw a lot of questions, especially in the 70s. That's a bit of a stray period for Mr. Connery.
Well, I think that there's like let's start at the beginning with not the beginning. His first role was in like 1954, something like that.
Let's jump into Darby O'Gill and the Little People.
Okay. Yeah. No. That wasn't his first. He was on like a TV show or something.
It was
something and he did a BBC version of something about King Henry. He was Hotspur in a production, like a BBC production. He played Hotspur. But yeah, Darby O'Gill and the Little People, Hell Riders. That's one what he did with Patrick McGowan, which isn't the legend that's how he got Bond, because they offered Bond to McGowan and McGowan didn't want to do it.
Yeah, for I believe it was religious reasons. McGowan was quite a religious man and did not want to play like a assassin character.
Oh, I thought it was the womanizing that he had an issue with.
That probably also wasn't so great.
Yeah.
There's some connective tissue there.
Something about that, yeah. But then he went on to do The Prisoner and did his own another spy piece.
The spy thing hadn't really taken off by that point. The boom hadn't really begun, despite things like North by Northwest haven't already been out. Like, there were popular spy films, but the spy genre wasn't really popular until around the mid 60s.
Right. Well, isn't that Secret Agent Man kind of like is that sort of a tipping point for the spy genre there? Like not tipping point, but like sort of like we're on the uptick towards the more popularity. I don't know. This is your genre.
I'm trying to think of where we, in terms of our journey on Spy Hearts. The tipping point, big time, is Goldfinger.
Yeah, that's the one you hear.
The
watershed moment.
But you can also, I think, maybe look at what Hitchcock's doing and how that's kind of building up, and then you have a huge hit like North by Northwest in 1959, which is like inspiring From Russia with Love. So it's kind of, success has many fathers. So I
Right.
think it was a number of movies kind of leading to the big wave, but it's that 1-2 punch of Goldfinger and Thunderball that just opens the doors to all of the spy stuff of the 60s.
Well, and it certainly, I mean, it launches his career into he's become such a well-known figure because of Bond. And I mean, we can discuss the greatness of particular Sean Connery Bond films, and we each, I'm sure, have our favorites. Like some of us may love You Only Live Twice, and some of us
I'm
might.
wearing the T-shirt today actually, for the recording.
I appreciate it. Yeah,
There you go.
and some of us might love Thunderball. That those people are not in this recording right now. Or
Well,
maybe-
technically speaking,
me.
I am wearing a Thunderball T-shirt. I will just say. So, despite me not being that film's biggest fan at all, you can have a nap in the middle and feel refreshed by the end. Yeah.
Anytime there's an underwater sequence, you can feel free to rest your eyes and come back later.
But the sounds of the swaying ocean lull me to sleep.
That's what I'm like. I want this to be longer. Release the longer cut.
That's like your white noise when you go to bed. It's just Thunderball.
It's just people
you know
swimming
what?
in Thunderball.
The score to Thunderball, those underwater sequences, that would make an amazing white noise machine. You could totally be lulled to sleep by that John Barry music.
Yeah, it's just dun-dun.
Yeah.
Just very slow and soft and keeping you just like feel you all cozy and warm. Yeah, I think that he's doing other films during the Bond years, but none of those movies really take off or do. I mean, as far as like I was looking through it and going like, he didn't really do much like of note other than the Bond films during those years.
The most notable one I'd say is in 1964, the year of Goldfinger. You've got Marnie, the Alfred Hitchcock film. That I think it was kind of a bit polarizing at the time of its release. It wasn't like a Hitchcock smash, but it's one that over time has been re-examined and reappraised a lot. I believe if you actually Google Sean Connery GIFs, some of the ones that'll show up will be Marnie ones, and no one, I don't know how many people realize they're Marnie related.
They think
but,
that they're
it definitely
Bond.
has. Yeah, it definitely has a certain amount of presence, especially if you talk to Hitchcock scholars, they'll mention Marnie for sure. Also, like in 1962, he's taking part in The Longest Day, which was a huge hit at the time, which is more of an ensemble film about D-Day.
Right.
So.
Well, he returns to that later in his career with A Bridge Too Far, like a huge ensemble piece, World War II. Like, I think everyone is in that movie. Like everyone at the time was in A Bridge Too Far. That's 1977. Like Anthony Hopkins, Olivier, everyone. Just everybody is in that film because it's 4 hours long. And just this vignettes like, oh, can we get who can we get for this 5-minute segment? It's like a Robert Altman film in a lot of ways. But yeah, like looking at like how we sort of like tapered down at the end of his, like I would say the official run.
I'm watching you now. I'm watching.
No, I'm saying we get what is it? Diamonds Are Forever. It's like what 71.
Yeah.
And like Molly Maguire's comes out in 1970, and that's kind of a flop. I mean, they spent $10 million on it. I think it made $2 million. And he has this sort of like series, and we can say like with the 70s, it's sort of like he does like one movie that does well, and then he does a movie that doesn't do well. Like he's putting out movies like every year, if not 2 a year, and like because then you've got like Murder on the Orient Express, and then Zardoz.
Not seeing the problem.
If you look quite closely, the problem is dangling out on the right hand side.
It's just there's
drooping a bit. Yeah.
There's a lot of work done on costumes, and it wasn't in sewing. It
needed more. It needed more work. Well, I know Cam, you're a big fan of Zardoz. No, I know you're a big fan of. Well, you've mentioned certainly Robin and Marion on the show.
I love Robin and Marion.
Yeah, like Robin and Marion is a pretty fantastic movie that in some ways feels ahead of its time. We now look at a movie like Logan and be like, oh, what an amazing, elegy to a character.
Right.
And that's kind of what Robin and Marion was doing back in the 70s, where you had Sean Connery and Audrey Hepburn playing these older versions of Maid Marian and Robin Hood and kind of reflecting on their life together and sort of the things that had kept them apart. And it very much is the final Robin Hood story.
Yeah.
And it's one that like it was, I think, modestly successful at the time. Even at that, I don't know. It was one that definitely has gained traction.
Yeah, I think that maybe we separate this from like commercial success to critically. Critically, it was well received. People really liked it. I loved that movie for a number of reasons. Because you're seeing these aging versions of these iconic characters, and there's also a wonderful story. I was a fight choreographer for many years. There's a great story about that final fight between the sheriff and Robin, when you're seeing like the long shot of them like just wailing on each other. That's actually the two stunt guys fighting, because the fight choreographer, the sword master, was sitting. Like they're doing this long shot. He's sitting there with the director, and they're going, that's not, those aren't the right moves. And then he's like, they're hitting each other, and they're just like, oh, keep rolling, because it's just these two Slavic like stunt guys who like got in a fight because one guy did the wrong move and hit him, so then they just started like going at it.
Oh, they're straight up fighting each other.
Yes, they are straight up trying to like beat the hell out of each other in that sequence that you see from far away. And then of course they like cut in later with like the close-up shots of
I mean, that's a little behind the scenes. That's basically how me and Cam are in between bits of the podcast. He just edits it all out. I just berate him constantly.
That's how all decisions are made. It's over a duel.
Well, that's it's the Highlander way. But yeah, the 70s, you've got like Robin and Marion, Wind and the Lion, Man Who Would Be King, Murder on the Orient Express, Bridge Too Far, Great Train Robbery. I mean, I think critically,
a lot of period pieces.
Yeah, he's just doing a lot of like very period movies, and critically, I think these were well accepted. I don't know, like financially, he's hit and miss.
I think Man Who Would Be King was a significant hit.
Yes.
That one is also probably, if you're looking at the 70s for Sean Connery, that's probably regarded as his classic of this period. That's him and Michael Caine together, and hopefully we cover that one on our Patreon or something like that further down the road on Spy Hards, because that movie is, I think, a really fantastic adaptation of the Rudyard Kipling story.
Yeah, it's really, I was reading a review of it where someone said this is the original buddy movie, and it's not a comedy. I mean, there are certainly like comic elements in their interactions with one another, but it's not a comedy, but it is a buddy movie. And I was like, that's kind of an interesting, like that's the beginning of the buddy movie genre in some ways, and how like it was financially did well.
This is where my my lack of cinema knowledge annoys me, because like a running joke on the show is I've never seen anything, because every film we tackle, it's like, this is like won 12 Oscars and blah 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 blah, and I've like, nah, never seen it, mate. But I'll watch I don't know, some really trashy mid-90s film a bunch of times as a kid. I'll never touch the classics, and I only am now getting around to what some people would call a classic. I think I watched like Casablanca for the first time a couple of weeks ago.
Really?
Most people would say for shame, right? They would say for shame.
My wife in a lot of ways is the same way. Like she just doesn't like to revisit things. So I mean, I understand some of the mindset there. She also loves the 90s trash as much as I do. I mean, I have multiple genres, and I think that's like, I think in exploring like my personal attachment to Sean Connery, we'll get there as well, because he certainly has some trash coming up in the 80s and 90s. But that 70s era is kind of like the Bond and those movies, like all those period movies in the 70s, are kind of what I grew up on with him because of my mom, and just like watching like The Wind and the Lion and like, things like that, and just being like, oh, okay, like he was a commanding presence.
It's an interesting predicament for you to be in as a kid in the 70s, because if you were a kid in, say, the 60s, you're seeing a screen icon in James Bond leave and do something else and be other characters that you're not used to. And that's a bit of a transition period. But if you're a 70s kid, he is both Bond and whatever he's putting out, because you're maybe catching the Bonds on like a screening at a cinema, or they're playing them on TV perhaps. But he can be more adaptable to you at that point. And then going forward in like the 80s, 90s, again, the same thing. But I can imagine it was quite tough for the children and the teenagers that were watching Bond in the 60s, because this is James Bond and he's walking around in that red suit from Zardoz. What is going on?
Oh, the balls! It's just. I mean the Thunderballs. That should have been Thunderball 2 or Thunderballs with a Z. Yeah, it's just I guess that's true. As you seeing him as you're not. He's not so typecast as Bond in those films. I mean, he did some like there's like what Meteor and other like things in the 70s that were not great, but like these period pieces were really good. Like in my opinion, like it just is like, all of these films where you're like, oh, okay, great. He's just like he feels at home in these movies. He feels like comfortable in these movies, and that's kind of something I want to get into in the later films of his career, like that. I don't think always is the case. Like then you get to like when you get to sort of like the you get Outland. It feels like he's trying to do like, oh, I'm going to do a science fiction movie. Like again, like Zardoz did not do well. Like he's like, I'm going to try like this sci-fi thing again, and it's just like it doesn't. I mean, I think Outland is much better than Zardoz, but it's also not the critical or financial hit that I think that he was trying to like. And this is something that comes up much later, and we'll discuss in his later decision making on what movies to do. I think he chose to take movies because he's like saw things were popular, and he's like, well, I got to do one of those. Like I got to do a science fiction film because that's what's happening, and so I mean, maybe I'll try my hand at that genre.
This is again like my lack of knowledge isn't helping, but with Zardoz, had the sci-fi wave started yet? Have we had Star Wars by this point?
Star Wars is 1975.
No, I mean, but like 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, that was earlier.
A big deal in 1968, and Zardoz feels a little more drawn from that.
Yeah,
where it's sci-fi fantasy by way of somewhat abstract storytelling. It's not a straightforward narrative, really.
I mean, Sean dancing around a monolith was a bit on the nose.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little like, he's got the bone.
Yeah.
He's waving around. But like Outland feels much more of a descendant of Star Wars.
Yeah, and it's a Peter Hyams film also, isn't it? Like Peter Hyams is a pretty like fairly skilled mainstream filmmaker.
Right. And it felt like he's trying to get into I'm going to get into this genre of films, which then he returns to like again, like we get to the mid 80s when Highlander shows up, which I, will say is I will fight anyone who doesn't think that's a great film.
It's better than the Presidio.
Yes.
Say that.
Yeah. Well, my love of Highlander is just like it. I don't know. I think that what makes Highlander a good film for me, it was a box office. Like nobody went to see that in the theaters, but it became it spawned such a huge like following afterwards. And I think the problem is they've been constantly trying to get back to that well of whatever people liked about the original. There should have been only one movie. Like don't keep making these. Like don't keep, the TV show should have been like kind of I felt like separate thing. Like let's make it a different reality. Like you can do the same story, but like they're attempting to connect the two. But yeah, I think that what makes that, and this is sort of where I was going in like this stage of his career. Once we get to like the mid 80s, is he's the sort of the second lead, and he feels real comfortable there. And I think that's where, like, where he had like success in the 70s as a leading man, looked like he felt really comfortable. But this is after Never Say Never Again. And I feel like there's sort of like this, he's on this precipice of, is he a leading man still? Like, can he carry a film by himself? Like, is it going to be a huge success? And he starts taking these like second lead characters like Highlander, and I think he's great. I think Clancy Brown is amazing in that movie. I think they're the two things that make that movie fun to watch. I don't think it's a great film. I think it's a lot of fun to watch, and it's his performance along with Clancy Brown as like, the sort of second lead and the villain, the antagonist, that are so great. While like The Name of the Rose comes out like the same year as Highlander, which again, fantastic movie, but like he like quickly sort of goes right into like, again, like when did the Presidio come out? I can't
88.
remember. Yeah, he's got like Presidio, Last Crusade, Red October, Rising Sun, Just Cause, where he's sort of like always playing this like the second lead. The Rock.
I think that though really kicks off with Untouchables.
Yes.
Which brought him in as, he's recruited by Kevin Costner and that to help take down Al Capone. And that was the movie that very much kickstarted the resurgence of Sean Connery. One of the things I think is interesting about him is that in the 60s, he's doing Bond, but you can see he's also like being drawn to, more character-driven work. He's doing Hitchcock's Marnie. He's doing The Hill, films like that. Like, you can see that he's someone also drawn to acting challenges, not just, having very strong commercial interests. The 70s feels almost like he's tipping into a little more, challenge work versus commercial work.
Right.
And some of those movies do connect, but it feels a little more like Connery wanting to challenge himself as an actor. The 80s feels like the point where he's starting to find a comfortable balance between the two, where he's working with Brian De Palma on The Untouchables. And, De Palma is one of the great directors of his era, but making a very commercial film. And Sean Connery walks away with an Oscar for this movie.
Yeah.
He has like just a live wire performance in the film. He, I think, is realizing at this point, I can do a supporting role and actually pretty much take over the movie and get the acclaim for it. So I don't need to necessarily put in all of the work of a leading man role, many of which aren't as interesting as a supporting role.
Yeah, like which is the same thing, like Rising Sun, Red October. Like, I personally love The Rock. I think it's a trashy 90s action movie, but he's great. He's great in it. It's like, because he's like, he could be Bond. Like, Womack, you piece of shit.
I think The Rock and Last Crusade are the most important movies he makes for influencing the younger generation, like myself and a few years younger than me, to really carrying the mantle for him until the end of his career.
Yeah, I think I think you're right, because Last Crusade, you can bring up who could be Indiana Jones's dad, like who can really play that, and he's great, and he's soft in that role, which is something you don't normally see from him. He's not a hero, like he's not swashbuckling, Sean Connery, like coming in and getting into a fight. Like, he's just using his umbrella to like scare some birds to take down a plane. Like, it's brilliant, and it is very like, character driven. And then you have like The Rock, where he is James Bond again, kind of like you see him as like aging. Like, it's The Rock is kind of the Robin and Marion for James Bond.
In some ways, a little louder.
Yeah,
a little louder.
Yes, much louder, and not quite as an auteur like piece.
Well, Michael Bay is an auteur,
but I mean, it's just like but I mean, I think that there's definitely a comparison to be made. They're 20 years apart, but it is very similar. Like, coming back to that, what would this guy be doing at this age, and what would have actually happened to him? Yeah, he ends up in jail. And just like getting, sent to prison, and has no life, and just sitting there. I just love like that.
I do. I want to give a little bit of credit to a film we haven't mentioned yet, but we're in the 90s now, and that is Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Now, I know it's a cameo role at the end, technically, like it's not a proper job, but it's the one time I've ever acted, and I played King Richard in something else, and I completely channeled King Richard Connery style when I did it, and I will always thank him for that I got to do a full-on accent. I couldn't grow a beard to save my life, so I had one stuck on, but otherwise, it was tremendous.
Oh, I just assumed you'd be dressed as a lion, doing the Disney version as a player.
Yes, I was whistling.
Yes. Great. Oh yeah, the his cameo at the end, which sort of leads into, there's a lot of like sort of like in the 80s where he does like sort of the Valiant, where he's the Green Knight, like, which is kind of just like an extended cameo performance, and he gets into those, like, that's just before, right around Highlander, at the same time where he's kind of in his fantasy phase. But yeah, like he does those cameos where he just like sort of like shows up in a movie as well. Like he'll do like 2 movies in a year, but one of them is definitely like, I'm just showing up for like 2 days. And like it's interesting you mentioned that, Camo, about how he sort of like sees those supporting roles as more interesting. There's watching them and watching him in these performances, I always feel like he seems more comfortable. That he's not carrying the movie. Like,
there's less pressure on him.
Right. And he can really dig into it and, come up with whatever he's going to do. Of course, he's never changing his accent. Whether he's playing an Irishman in The Untouchables or a Russian submarine captain in Hunt for Red October. That lends itself to parody, but it's also like the characters are different in a lot of ways. Like, you can see that there's a different character here, and there's a lot of people like, oh, it's just Sean Connery being Sean Connery. And I'm like, no. Like, there's a change from the early career and the 70s and the 80s. You can see like that there's still work there, and that's why. Again, we go back to The Rock. How he treats Nicolas Cage's character is just like, you feel like he went back and he like channeled everything he felt about James Bond into that, like, into that role. Like, he's like, oh, so you must be trained in weaponry, hand-to-hand combat. Yeah, it's just like, these sorts of things that he like, just his feelings about that role and what he would think that person was doing, 60 years
I look at like someone like Bill Shatner, for instance. Now, he was a household name. Well, I suppose in some ways he still is a household name. I shouldn't say that of him. But in the 60s, it was very much, I would say, the height, maybe early 70s. TOS was still on the original series of Star Trek, sorry, it was still on the air. It was about Captain Kirk. And you could say that, Bill has been working. Even now, he's doing documentaries and stuff. The guy's still going. Fair play to him. He has the energy of an ox. But, and that's his animal comparison. Sean Connery has a panther. Bill Shatner is an ox. And but I don't think he's ever improved from that point in the 60s. Sean, I think his acting genuinely improved as he went along. You look at him in The Untouchables, you look at him in The Rock, compared to how he was in, say, like From Russia with Love or Goldfinger, not bad films. But I think his acting and technique has improved.
Oh, yeah. I think there's incredible growth. And yes, I would agree. Shatner sort of like peaks and finds like he's a parody of himself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he knows that that's what people are coming to see. Like, Boston Legal, which I actually thought he did a very good job on that TV show.
It's a fun show.
It's a fun show. I thought he was great, but he also like finds a way to make that character William Shatner. Like, he knows that people are watching him to be like, even though he's like, this is a totally different character, whatever. Like, people kind of want to see me be Shatner. Which is interesting because you think about like the two of those. It's an interesting comparison between the two of them. Like, people have their impersonations of both of those actors, and I've always found, as someone who does impersonations, always found that there's two levels of impersonation, and one of them is actual, like trying to be like, you're trying to actually sound like Sean Connery talking to you, and then there's the like parody, like, you have the brains of a goat. And, like, you know, like people who go over the top. And people want over the top Shatner. With Connery, I think people are still interested in the real connection. And, like, especially, like, I think Hunt for Red October is a good example where he's just like, people, I think a lot of the criticism, there's like, you've got everybody trying to do a Russian accent. You've got Sam Neill, who's from New Zealand, doing a Russian accent. Like, Sean Connery is not doing another accent, but his acting, as far as, like, you know, like, you get that feeling of, you know, like, he's really, his character and Alec Baldwin's characters are the people that you want in this situation connecting to each other. Like, these are the people who don't want there to be a nuclear escalation. And it's just like, there's a lot of meat there to that character. It's not just as much as people want to kind of like brush it off, like, oh, let them sing, you know, like, it's like the Russian submarine guy with the thick Scottish accent, but that character has a lot of meat. It's not a caricature.
I think one thing that's interesting about Sean Connery is a lot of, I think, people look at him for those Bond movies. You know, he's kind of a working class actor coming up, that they're like, this is a guy who kind of wants to make entertainments for people. But, like, if you go and read some of the, you know, behind the scenes documents about the development processes of some of those Bond movies, where they're, you know, printing some of the notes Sean Connery was giving them, he was very invested in story and had incredibly good instincts for what would work and what wouldn't. And I think that explains why he wants to do, you know, Hitchcock movies and stuff like The Hill, why he's drawn in these different directions, and probably why he is getting, you know, or pursuing more of these supporting roles, is that he's someone who genuinely cares about storytelling and character in a way that I don't know that William Shatner does.
Right.
Scott.
Yeah.
I think, you know, William Shatner's there, you know, for the opportunity. He'll kind of do anything, but, like, and he can be really great. But, like, I think Connery is someone who gives off this, I don't give a, you know, fill in the blank kind of attitude, but he does. And you can tell that he's someone, there's all these, like, behind the scenes anecdotes of directors who did not get along with him. And it was always cases where he clearly did not respect their storytelling instincts, and he had very strong opinions on how a story should unspool.
That's a really interesting point. Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Well, you just have to look at the Indiana Jones 5. Okay, there's no trailer out yet, but just a few days at time of recording, depends when this comes out, they had the D23 Expo, and Harrison Ford introduced a clip that we haven't seen yet to viewers in the audience. And you can watch the speech he gives online, and he gets tearful about it, about being Indiana Jones and having this one last ride. And you could tell, I mean, okay, there are people that listen to this, but like, he's an actor, he's acting it. Sure, maybe he is acting the entire thing. I think he's invested and cares, and I think Sean is in the same basket as Harrison in that respect.
Yeah, I think there's an investment there, and I think that it's interesting. I want to come back to that, but, like, when I think of why I think of Sean Connery as kind of the best Bond, he's the OG, he's the original Bond, but he's the guy who walks in way before Daniel Craig, who I think for me is kind of like second, like maybe Brosnan could have been there around the Remington Steele era, but he kind of came to Bond a little late in his career. But there's a sense when you're watching Sean Connery as Bond that, this is a guy who can walk into any room, whether it's like he has the confidence to walk into a baccarat table and sit down and talk to anybody, or get into a fist fight with somebody. Like, he just has that, like, he has both the mental, like, ability and the physical ability to come in and just, like, control the situation. And I think that that's something that Lazenby was great physically. Roger Moore is not a physical presence.
How dare you?
Not intimidating physically. Honestly, I feel like right now I could have taken Roger Moore at his peak. and I'm not in the best shape of I've ever been. But like,
Cam's entire training regime is based around looking like Roger Moore.
That's right. The knees bend workout.
Knees bend.
Yeah, he has 4 pockets in all of his jackets, just at the front for some reason as well.
Living Daylights, not Living Days. View to a Kill is what I keep thinking of. It is, I don't know, just a physical specimen that
it's not as bad as the Casino Royale 67 workout, but that's for a whole other day.
Jimmy Bond, get a little Peter Sellers action in there.
Mm.
But I think that what you're saying, like Cam earlier in his career, yes, I think that he's got pretty good instincts sometimes. Like he obviously has some misses with like Zardoz and other things. I think Outland was a great shot. Like I don't think it's a bad movie. I don't think it's bad. I think he had a good idea and thought that. I think what I was saying before was that he's like, okay, maybe I need to choose something in this genre because it's a very popular genre, and like I'm going to find the best project for me. I think later in his career he starts to have problems with that though, because there's the stories of he was offered Morpheus in The Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
He was offered Gandalf, and he said no because he didn't understand it. He didn't understand how they were going to film these things, and I'm like, he's an older guy at that point. I get it. Here are my thoughts on those two. Like Morpheus, I don't think that was a loss. I don't think he would have been better than Lawrence Fishburne as Morpheus, who he worked with in Just Cause, as well as Ed Harris, who he worked with in The Rock.
I wonder if that would have been, because there was several different casting iterations of The Matrix, and I'm wondering if when they were looking at Connery for Morpheus was when they were looking at Will Smith for Neo.
That would make sense. They're switching because
an age thing there that would work as well.
Yes, there's also an age thing, but there was also that would continue. I was thinking about like Finding Forrester, Just Cause, Rising Sun, where they would commonly cast him with a younger black actor. Where I mean, he did fairly well. I mean, Finding Forrester, I think, is the only one that really doesn't like reach the same level as like. And Just Cause was pretty good, but Rising Sun was great. He and Wesley Snipes had great chemistry in that movie.
I think if we had Sean Connery in either of those two franchises, I don't think the franchises would have turned out the same. It's like that old story about was it Ben Affleck was going to be Jason Bourne for a little while, and then it went to Matt, or was it Brad Pitt?
Brad Pitt, yeah.
Brad Pitt.
Yeah,
like I don't think we would have had Jason Bourne in 2016 if Brad Pitt was.
You would have had one movie.
Maybe
you would have had
or
one.
Maybe the famous Tom Selleck for Indiana Jones.
Yeah. You may have gotten Temple of Doom. You may have gotten.
But would the audience have like really jumped on Indiana Jones in the same way? Maybe not, right? Like, you never know.
I don't know. Have you guys seen The Offer? The show. This has nothing to
no.
do with it, but like what we're talking about. But like, it's really interesting to watch the behind the scenes choices that people wanted to make. I highly recommend it. Matthew Good's performance is like something that could easily have been caricature. That is mind blowing to me. Like I watched it all the way through twice now. But there's a lot of that stuff. Like when you think about if The Godfather had been made with some of the people that they wanted to cast in it originally, it would never be the movie that it was, and it certainly wouldn't have spawned. Well, we wouldn't got Godfather 2. We could do without Godfather 3.
And let's be honest, this is an audio podcast, but I can see both of your handsome faces right now. And I know that I'm no spring chicken at this point. Modern music scares me, and a lot of modern things scare me. So I can understand Sean Connery going, I don't really understand the idea of The Matrix, and then just walking away from it. I completely get that, because I can't listen to Billie Eilish. It confuses me.
Here's the question, though, Scott. I'm looking at, Connery's 90s output, and he does Dragonheart, which is something of a success, and I think a lot of younger kids at the time probably learned who Sean Connery was through that movie. But like he's doing a lot of these movies that I'm looking at First Night, and I'm looking at The Avengers, and these are big studio vehicles, kind of action based movies that he's signing on for. First Knight was, I think, like a mediocre performer, but the Avengers was a disaster.
Yes.
And so I wonder how much of his fear of doing things like Lord of the Rings or, The Matrix is stemming from like, I've signed onto these blockbusters and The Rock turned out great, but then the Avengers didn't. I don't really understand this new paradigm of movies. And when you look at kind of what he does towards, we know he closes out his career with League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
That's where I was going.
Yeah, where he
it's
rolls
a film
the
I
dice.
stick up for, actually.
No,
I can't.
No.
But he's rolling the dice on something that is more new Hollywood. But you see, like, leading into that, he's doing stuff like Finding Forrester, which was mentioned, or Entrapment, which are kind of more of these old school approaches to storytelling. Like they're done in the 90s, but and in early 2000s, but they feel like movies that could have come out of the 80s, for example.
Entrapment definitely feels like it's like, oh, we're like, this felt like it could have been an 80s or early 90s heist movie. Definitely, like, and it's just sort of, Finding Forrester, again, like more of a character-y movie. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, from what I heard, he took that because he passed on Matrix and Lord of the Rings, and they were such a success. He was like, well, I've got to do another movie. I'm going to do this film, and then it just tanks. And that totally, there's a number of reasons I feel like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was horrible. I feel like they tried to do too much of a special effects driven film. If they'd gone to the original source material, I don't know if you guys are familiar with those.
Yep. It's fantastic.
It's amazing. And it could have been really good, and you didn't have to do like this. We're going to like do giant special effects driven, like everything crazy. And that's where I think that movie fails. Also, it just has no real story. Like there's no real, I don't know, emotional investment for me in that story. But like I think he took those movies because he passed on Lord of the Rings and The Matrix and saw them become huge successes, and he was like, oh well, I've got to take this. And then it's like, yep, you know what, I'm going to retire. This is
maybe I should champion Sean Connery doing Lord of the Rings, because if he had retired, we definitely wouldn't have gotten the Hobbit sequels.
Yes, I would agree with that. And honestly, I think, like, here's my thing. I love Ian McKellen, but I mean, that is the one, like Morpheus, I don't see him. Even with Will Smith, I don't really see him as Morpheus. I just don't see it working. And that's probably why that didn't work out. Or maybe he just decided he didn't want to do it. But Lord of the Rings, I can picture him as Gandalf. And it's a much more like, kind of like, you get I'm sure you'd have the wonderful warm moments, but like intimidating. Oh yeah. Like I can just see him just being like really scary when he needed to be, like in a way that Ian McKellen, I feel like sometimes isn't in those films. Like when Gandalf,
like on the bridge with the Balrog. I don't think when he's screaming "None shall pass," it's not. It's more like a desperation scream, like you won't get past me.
Right.
Whereas I could see Sean just like turning to him like at the gun barrel and Bond and be like, "None shall pass," and you're like, "Oh, good lord!"
He could have just even a quiet
walking that way. He's out of there.
A quiet "None shall pass."
Yeah,
and just
easy.
Could have been interesting, but I find like I'm thinking like more like the Twin Towers when he shows up, when he returns, and he just like knocks, Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas out. Like, and he's just like, fly. It's the brush of the staff like knocks him aside. Ian McKellen he's a brilliant actor. I think when I try to like picture I can see Sean Connery as Gandalf, and I could see it working, and we would not have gotten the Hobbit sequels, and I would have been very happy with that. That's fine with me. Or, Christopher Lee honestly could have played Gandalf as well, which brings us around to the circle of like, wasn't he considered originally for Bond as well? But they didn't because of Ian Fleming's. Aren't they cousins?
There was a lot of names floated around for Bond back in the day. I don't think Lee was like seriously considered. They were looking, I think, closer at people like James Mason than Christopher Lee. But I'm sure there was he was definitely included in the conversations at a certain point.
Yeah, I think that
they're step cousins.
And I mean, because this is the guy who like I know what sound a man makes when he's stabbed in the back. Yes, that imposing, like that would have been more imposing, like a Christopher Lee type of performance from Gandalf, and maybe that's why Christopher Lee gets cast as Saruman, and Sean Connery does not work there for Gandalf. But I don't know. I could see that working.
I could see it, but I would love to know what his reasons for passing on that one were.
He said that he didn't understand it.
He didn't understand it, but like Lord of the Rings is a pretty classic story at this point in time. Like Connery would have been familiar with it. Maybe he just never liked fantasy. Oh, but then he does like Highlander, which works out really well. Maybe it was because of Highlander 2, The Quickening. He was like, oh, no, don't take me back.
There's a great story about that whole the creation of Highlander 2 from Clancy Brown, because they asked him to come back as well. And I guess Christopher Lambert called Clancy Brown and said, like, have you looked over the script? And Clancy Brown was like, Chris, this is a piece of shit. Like, I'm not why? And he's like, well, I wrote it. Like, Sean's going to do it. And he's like, well, Sean will do anything if you pay him enough money. And yeah, it was like, even though like Highlander 2, like there's a couple of moments with Sean Connery that I think are funny. Like, it's just fun. And there's like, some whatever, but it's just like, it's a horrible movie. I think that he maybe had a difficulty. I think Scott was saying like that figuring how you're going to film it. How are you going to make this work? And maybe that's what he didn't understand. And in the Matrix, I think maybe that is the same thing. It's like he didn't quite understand like how are you going to make this work. He's more of a practical effects guy. Even in like Indiana Jones, there's not a lot of green screen at that point, like in anything that they're doing. Like they're all on sets, and maybe in just discussion.
We're gonna put you in a harness, and then can you just like hold onto this pole and then twirl around on it a bunch of times, and then we're gonna put all the bad guys in. Don't worry about the bad guys.
Yeah.
And he's like, what?
Kind of like the whole Star Wars prequels school of acting, where like you had classically trained actors, Ewan McGregor and Liam Neeson, who were completely gobsmacked shooting in front of these green screens and blue screens. And maybe like that was something Sean Connery was recognizing his limits. And if they're describing to him how they're going to make this movie, don't worry, you're going to be in front of a screen. You're just going to be swinging away at golf balls.
Right.
What? Like I think a lot of actors live in fear of being made to look stupid on a screen because they're the ones that are exposed. When the movie comes out, the director may feel horrible about, making a movie that doesn't work, but it's the actors who are the people that are being projected that if you ask the average moviegoer, that's who's the problem. They're going to say they were terrible in that movie. And maybe Connery was just genuinely fearful of that.
Yeah, but I think that then it's weird that he does League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I think that it's like, because that movie there are scenes like I feel like he's like, well, maybe I should do this. So it's sort of like, all right, I'll give it a chance because I've seen the success here. And like Attack of the Clones comes out in 2002, and Christopher Lee, who's whatever, fought in like, I think he has the record for the most sword fights in film ever. I think it's like 50 or something like that. Like, is CGI'd, in that fight, like, and it like I have my problems with the prequels, but I don't know how he's probably already started shooting League of Extraordinary Gentlemen at that point.
I think the other thing that we're missing out with Lord of the Rings is just the length of time it took to film.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe he just wasn't willing to commit to, I think, was it like 12 months in New Zealand or something like that? It was,
he liked
at least a year.
And New Zealand is not the Bahamas.
And he was not a young man.
No.
So like maybe he was kind of going like, I don't really want to go shoot in New Zealand for a prolonged period of time on something I don't really understand. I do feel like Extraordinary Gentleman was him putting his toe in the water for these types of movies.
He thought,
and he just picked the wrong one.
Yeah.
He really did.
Yeah. What was the right one that year?
In 2003? Yeah, Return of the King.
That
would have been the right one.
Yeah, Return of the King.
2003 is not like known as the glory day of CG driven blockbusters. I'm trying to even think because boy, I would that's after the first two Mummies. I don't. Is that like an iRobot year? I don't remember.
That's Bruce Almighty. Hulk.
Okay.
The original Hulk.
The core.
The Ang Lee one. Secondhand Lions.
X2.
Yeah.
Right. Which I'm sure if he didn't understand, Lord of the Rings or the Matrix on paper, X-Men and this kind of rising wave of superhero stuff would have really thrown him as well.
Ooh, it's Charlie's Angels Full Throttle. That's the one he should have been in. Put him on a harness with Lucy Liu.
The Matrix movies. The Matrix movies.
Oh, right. Of course, the sequels.
The second two. You know what? That may be where that decision comes from. Like, when you think about it, like that they greenlit 2 sequels and whatever. He's like, okay, well, didn't understand how that movie was going to get made, but it seems to be doing well. Like,
at least he didn't do Kangaroo Jack.
Also true. I just think he's an actor who likes bouncing off of other actors. Yeah. Like when you go through, whether it's him in,
like a kangaroo
bouncing off,
kangaroo,
off.
Yes.
That's a great segue.
You go back to the Bonds. The best Bonds are the ones where they pair him with like a really strong, villain or Bond girl, something like that. You go further down where he's pairing up with a lot of actors playing like a supporting role, whether he's opposite Connery, or not Connery, Costner, I should say, or Nick Cage. And then like this whole CG era, it's going to be a lot of stuff of like, Connery, you're by yourself here.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if like that really did not work for him.
I think that's a fair point to make. I think that, yeah, these great, like his, like especially his 90s, he has a lot of movies in the 90s where, like I said, he's playing like a sort of a second lead, but he's playing off of someone, and he's kind of the feature of those movies where, like Rising Sun. I mean, he's really good. He's really good in Rising Sun. They say that if you resort to violence, you've already lost. And it's he's commanding the scenes that he is in. He's very much like he's present in a lot of those movies in a way that I didn't feel like he was very present in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Like when he just seems like he's like, like what's going on? I don't know. And like you go back to like First Night, which I have so many, as a fight choreographer, I have so many problems with First Night and the end of First Night, with how they just like they digitally put in. And this is maybe again like something that influences his choices in seeing how like there was a lot of bad reaction to like that last fight in First Night when they digitally put in the blades of the swords because they were like they got to go be going faster. They've got to be like superhuman, whatever. And there was a backlash and people were like, it looks terrible. It just looks awful. And I think that, again, yeah, maybe he just like didn't have a good taste in his mouth for CGI special effects. And also because that's also, he wouldn't be playing off someone. And like you look at the effects movie, like The Rock has a lot of explosions and loudness and like things going on, but it's all very practical.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of generated elsewhere or like even green screen stuff going on. I mean, there's nothing, especially nothing in his scenes.
Same with The Avengers. The Avengers is a movie that is a complete disaster coming out of a major studio and had a lot of problems behind the scenes, which kind of explain why it is in the form it is. But like his stuff is very practical. It's him in costumes in front of dealing either with the two leads or in front of a crowd of people. There's not a lot of scenes of him suddenly turning into a CG cartoon and bouncing around the room.
Yeah,
well, he does become a teddy bear at one point.
That is true,
but he's in a costume. So that's a costume. It's practical. It's not a animated teddy bear. And I think that even that scene, like the end sequence in the Avengers, when like everything's like crashing out, it's all practical. It's not like there's no we're gonna shoot this against you're gonna be here, and then it's just giant. You're in a giant blue room, and we'll fill it all in later.
It's a sword fight. He knows, about stage combat. They're like, Connery, we want to have you in a sword fight with Ray Fiennes. Okay, I understand that.
Yeah. There's just, I think what we've found in our discussion here is there's a lot of particular reasons for these decisions that he makes, and it's unfortunate that League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was the kind of what he went on. I mean, I know he did some voiceover work. Sir Billy is not something you want to watch. I've seen it. It's not good.
I have my Internet Movie Database page open. I'm just staring at the poster of that.
It's incredible.
You guys know the fuel that poster.
You guys know the Film Rage guys, right? They had to watch it for something, and it's and I was like, oh, I kind of gotta watch this because like listening to their review of it, I was like, maybe I can give it 5 minutes, and I can watch a terrible movie. And I was watching that one. No, thank you. And I feel really bad that those were the things that his like end of his career is like on such a kind of a down note. But it's like, how do you go out on top? Like, how do you know to go out on top?
Well, I can tell you this is not how you go out on top. I'm just going to read you all the synopsis for those who haven't seen Sir Billy. It's terrific, and I read synopsis on Spy Hard, so I will put my all into this and see if I can sell you on Sir Billy. A retired veterinarian living in a remote Scottish village encounters a goat who thinks he's a dog, an admiral who's afraid of water, and a beaver who was raised by rabbits.
And it should be noted that the cover art I was talking about, or the poster, animated Sean Connery looks like a potato.
Yes. A potato with eyebrows. With really thick eyebrows.
Here's a question I have for you. Looking at his filmography near the end, what should have been the point where he walked away? What would have been the one where people go like, perfect ending to that career? It doesn't have to be like his biggest movie, but what would have been the fitting end?
The Rock.
The Rock.
You think The Rock?
I think The Rock should have been the walk away.
He's walking off and like gets away at the end. Like it's perfect.
He gets away. True. He gets away. Like it's Bond. He's Bond again, even though he's not Bond. But like he just hey, like people can't see this obviously, but it's the thumbs up. Like what does that mean? I think it's just him walking away, and I think that like that would have been a perfect send off. Like it's kind of like where you came in, like people just know you for this type of character. Walking away, and like it was a commercial success at the time. It did really well. I think it would have been a great way for him to just kind of like sign off and be like, if something comes up that I really love, maybe I'll do it. But like that would have been. Like,
this is something that people know anyway, and I've certainly discovered through doing all the interviews on Spy Hards. People don't get the chance to walk away. Really, they are always chasing that dragon of one last high.
Dragonheart.
One last dragon heart.
Chasing that dragon heart. Sir Billy is chasing that dragon heart, and I don't think we could have ever, or he would have ever known to have walked away at the right time, because in his mind there were many more The Rocks and probably many more Thunderballs in his future.
Yeah, and like The Rock really repopularized him again. It was something like Sean Connery was the coolest guy around. It is weird though when you look at his follow-ups to The Rock that there wasn't something a little higher impact he put out. It's like the Avengers, where he's like the villain in sort of this curiosity of a blockbuster, I suppose, and then Entrapment, which is pretty old school stuff. Like it wasn't like he was really going for kind of high octane big movies. He was actually turning those down.
There's nothing wrong with getting a little bit wet.
Well, maybe the Avengers had something to do with it. I don't know. Like you have that, and then you have that break for 5 years until League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which is kind of a more high octane film. But yeah, he does.
Extrapolate it the other way around. You look at, say, the career of someone like Liam Neeson, and character actor, done all kinds of things, but never really known as the action star. And then he does Taken. And that just spurs this whole movement of dad action films, not just for Liam Neeson, but for countless other retired actors or actors that should have retired or actors that should not be in action films. And I just can't, I can't help but think that in another parallel universe, Sean had been the Taken guy. Like he could have been like, if there was like 5 years younger, maybe 10 years younger, you 10. Stick him in Taken, I would have bought it.
Yeah, 10 years younger, I would have bought Sean as the Taken guy. Because like I said, that's why I think he's great as Bond. Like he looks like a guy who could get into a fight with you and like beat the hell out of you.
Yeah.
And until you get Daniel Craig, George Lazenby. Yes. I think
I never got that with George. I always feel like he actually get one punch.
He looks like an athlete.
Break like glass.
He looks like an athlete. I don't know. I mean, there's just sort of there's an athleticness to George Lazenby, but like Daniel Craig looks like a guy who could handle himself in a fight.
Oh yeah,
but also
Roger Moore's the kind of guy that throws a banana on the floor and hopes you slip up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Brosnan,
not so bad.
Brosnan and Dalton. I met Timothy Dalton once, running past me on the streets of New York City, and this is something I'm gonna have to do an entire episode on, like run-ins with celebrities. I always like to mention the most random thing that people have done that I can think of at the time when I see them. So he's like literally running by me, and like not in like he's working out. He's like wearing regular clothes, but he's sprinting down the sidewalk. And as he gets close, I'm like, "I loved you in Flash Gordon," as he runs past me, and he must have gotten like a block past me and stops, and I hear from him like, "Gordon's alive!" And I turned around and I yelled like, "That's not your line!" And he's like, "No one remembers anything else from that movie." And turned around and kept running. And I was just like, "That's brilliant." But yeah,
this is when you hear the director yelling "cut," and it turns out you've walked onto the set of the film, and you're like, yeah. "Oh, sorry, guys."
What? Oh, I didn't see the PAs. Yeah, but I think that other than Daniel Craig, you have a lot of like Bonds who don't necessarily are like physically intimidating enough. Brosnan, Dalton, like but
this is not me declaring to the world that I could take George Lazenby in a fight.
no, that is.
Declaring. I think we got to find George's agent. I think George is still alive. We got.
He's still doing damage control. It's fine. But George Lazenby, I'm sure in his prime could take me. That's fine.
He's also very tall. Like
very tall. Like he could hold me. I'm 5'8", I think. He could hold me at arm's reach, and I'd just be doing like the scrappy dude. Just let me at him. Let me at him.
Thank you, guys. I think that this has helped me kind of like come to a lot of understanding, like more of like crystallize my feelings about like especially the later career of Sean Connery for me. All right, so to wrap up, we're going to each give our favorite Sean Connery Bond and non-Bond films. All right, Cam, you go first.
Okay,
Scott's
so
really having trouble.
Favorite Sean Connery Bond. This is always tricky for me, and listeners of Spy Hards will know this because we've covered all the Connery Bonds at this point. My favorite Connery Bond performance, I think, is maybe Dr. No, where he really has that lethal Ian Fleming element that kind of changes into more of a superhero character as you keep going through the franchise. But that's my favorite performance. But I would say that Goldfinger is the best Sean Connery Bond film. It's the one that just has all of the elements, the best villain, one of the best Bond girls. Just all of the elements really click into place in that one. And it's paced almost like something like an Indiana Jones movie where it just flies from beginning to end. So that's my favorite of his.
And non-Bond?
Oh my God. This is like so hard. I think my answer has changed over time. I think if you were to ask me when I was younger, I would probably say The Rock is my favorite. I might lean more towards The Untouchables now. I think so. I've just later in life become much more of an appreciator of Brian De Palma and everything he's bringing to that as a mainstream studio movie. You don't get that anymore. Like You don't get movies made that impeccably and with such a imaginative approach to cinematography. And Connery in The Untouchables is just unbelievably fun, insanely quotable. I know he's also quotable in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Hunt for Red October and so many other movies, but I think for me, I'm going to say Untouchables.
Scott?
Well, before I pick, let me just say, there's, you can look at the filmography of Sean Connery and Sir Sean Connery, I should say. Yeah, I live in England. I should give him his proper title.
Order of the Garters.
Something like that, sure. But there's few actors that, despite having maybe not the most extensive filmography, have left such an impact on film. He helped create a character that has lived on and will be soon celebrating its 60th anniversary in a few weeks' time. And I can imagine will go on longer than I'm going to be alive.
Yes.
Few people can put their hand up and say they did that. And I think that's credit to the man and credit to his skill. And speaking of Bond, my favorite Sean Connery Bond often flips around. But I think for me, in terms of pure performance, it's going to be Dr. No. I don't think you beat James Bond at that back of a table. That's just, and you've had your 6 when he takes that, he assassinates that bloke or the lady, I can't remember off the top of my head, but that's pure acting, Sean Connery. And that's his first major motion picture, really.
Yeah. And it's also the first Bond movie. We had not seen this before. This is not, it is now, I think that we quite often sort of take it for granted at this point in time, especially, generations. It's been 60 years. That first, to make it so iconic, it's, he's the guy who made it iconic.
Yeah, it takes a village. There were writers, there were cinematographers, directors. They all took a part in that film, but a lot of it was Sean. And I think that is part of the reason why we're still talking about him now, and we're still talking about Bond now. So Dr. No is my pick for Bond. Non-Bond, I'm going to match Cam with The Untouchables. The reason for me is, apart from, as he said, it's a great film, instantly quotable. I think Sean Connery suffers from something. I always mention Simon Pegg as my example. Whenever Simon Pegg does a film, it's Simon Pegg playing something. It's not an actor falling into a role. The Untouchables, for me, is one of the only films post-Bond where I don't see Sean Connery playing something. Like even The Rock, for instance, it's Sean Connery playing a spy that's retired. Like he's basically playing Bond again. Untouchables, he falls into that role. He becomes another person. It's such a good performance. It's no reason he won. Is it an Oscar for that?
Yes.
Yeah, best supporting actor that year.
Yeah. And that's the only time he's ever won an Oscar, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
Yes, that is correct.
So I think that sort of backs my argument up there as well. So for me, it's Untouchables. It's the one I would go back to and watch if I want to see his best performances outside of Bond.
For me, I'm going to agree with Cam. Goldfinger is where it all sort of crystallizes, I think, for him. Dr. No, great. It's a great intro. It has, but I think that it somehow in that second film, he's managed to completely, we get the team more. And as far as there's a great villain, great Bond girl. I agree that's there's an overall more completeness to that film in my sense. It's hard for me. I agree with both of you that Untouchables he's brilliant and infinitely quotable. I think he's infinitely quotable in anything, which is I know that we kind of joke about this. I sent for your 100th episode sent a fake Sean Connery message, but I learned to do that.
That was fake.
I'm sorry to inform you that my hypocrisy knows no bounds. I learned to do that to entertain my mother, and she would always get a laugh out of my Sean Connery impersonation. And there are so many of those moments in these films. I agree with the Untouchables on a lot of levels, but I mean personally, I love Highlander, and there's something about a movie about a Scottish guy where the only Scottish main character is actually playing an Egyptian. That is just so stupidly brilliant. And he comes out of the way. You have the brains of a goat, and you smell like a dung heap, and you have no idea whatsoever of your potential. There's just like he makes that movie watchable. Like he and Clancy Brown really make that. Christopher Lambert was great in Greystoke, but like it's like he's got such an aggressive smile and laugh that just I don't know, like that film, and I think that Sean Connery is one of the reasons that became an entire thing. Like that spawn, like people just like love his performance in that so much. Him and Clancy Brown, like that. That's why we have like 8 more movies, and like they shouldn't have been, because people were just trying to recapture that magic that he created in that film, like somehow, some way, even though it's just like in a lot of ways awful. I think for me, it sums up. I'm just trying to put Highlander in as many podcasts and podcast episodes as possible. Yeah, I probably Untouchables, and then shortly followed by Highlander. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here and help me kind of explore and work out all of those wonderful questions about Mr. Connery, Sir Sean Connery, and his career.
It's our pleasure. Spy movies are our game. So he's one of the masters. So of course, we're going to talk about it.
Where can people find you and the Spy Hards podcast?
Well, this is my favorite line. For spies, we're very easy to find.
We're like a classic Roger Moore Bond. We just walk into places and we're like, oh, yes, we're
Hello.
Spy Hards. Look at us, everybody. We're Spy Hards.
Where's the caviar? But yeah, basically, wherever you hear this podcast, you can find Spy Hards at Spy Hards on all social media, SPYHARDS. Every week we review a new spy movie. And in between that, we have interviews with all kinds of people, from Bond stars, people who have acted with Sean Connery in some of his Bond films, but like also directors, cinematographers, screenwriters of some of your favorite spy movies. So yeah, come check us out.
You guys get great gets. Like I just gotta say, like one of the things I really look forward to is like the Spy Masters episodes and things like that. Like the interviews you guys get. Like I really love listening to those.
Would you like a spoiler of one coming up?
Yes, please, because we got this is coming out soon, so let's know what's coming out.
Well, so for the 60th anniversary of Bond in a few weeks' time, we'll be tackling a new Bond film. We'll be going for Daniel Craig's first in Casino Royale. We have a few interviews happening, but I've just recorded one myself with Mr. Sebastian Foucan, who, if the name doesn't ring any bells to you, you may remember him as the one that's running away from Daniel Craig up the scaffolding and all around Madagascar.
Yes, he's the parkour guy.
Exactly. He invented parkour.
Really?
He invented it. Straight up invented him
free
and someone
running.
else, but they free running and parkour was his creation.
He's been in other films since? No,
Nope.
That's the only one. It's the other guy that I'm thinking of who was in. All right, you'll know who I'm talking about. I don't know the actor's name, and I feel bad that I don't, because usually I'm the guy who remembers that guy's name. From Die Hard, Live Free or Die Hard. He also does. You know who I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
He's Belgian or something.
It's not Ciro Raffaelli, is it?
We're all like quickly going to IMDb. But yeah, that's like I know it's not. I know that it was not the same guy, but like
That's the same guy from Kiss of the Dragon.
Yes.
Cyril Raffaelli.
Cyril Raffaelli. He's in the District B13 movies as well, which are a parkour-based action series. There's just two of those movies.
But I thought to find out if they're connected, because I don't think they weren't. I don't think they're in the same troupe together. But yeah. Anyway, a fascinating interview. And he shares a couple of really interesting stories and a couple of things he nicked from the set of Casino Royale, which I will save for the episode.
That's awesome. That is a fantastic action sequence. That is like one of the, I would say, it's a great reintroduction to Bond when they bring in Daniel Craig as Bond. Like that sequence at the beginning of that film is amazing, and I look forward to hearing that interview. Thanks again, gentlemen. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having us, Casey.
Much appreciated. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for checking out this top secret episode of Nerd Quests. Many thanks to Scott and Cam for coming over to talk to Sean Connery with me. Be sure to check out the Spy Hearts podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, stay safe and stay nerdy.